right. Good morning, everyone. I say morning because I am in the West Coast and it's about a little bit after 9 a.m. We have a roundtable discussion today on imperialism.
Yes.
And I titled it on what it means to be an anti-imperialist. But, it's a very broad topic, of course. So joining us is Carlo Parcelli. He is in Washington, D.C. We have Manuel Pasquale, and he is in Ontario or
No, I'm in
Quebec.
Yeah.
Okay, Quebec, Canada. Ian Cummer is coming live to us from a suburb in Moscow. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Hopefully we can have an interesting discussion. Before we start, maybe we can talk very quickly about current events in Moscow. I don't know if we want to do that.
Yes, I could.
Are you okay with that, Manuel?
Yeah, sure.
Taking a brief hiatus and discussing just the current event that happened in Moscow. Because Ian, I mean that wasn't too far away from your actual.
No, if you look at a map, in fact, you can even go to the Wikipedia page, and it has a map right there at the top of the Moscow rings, and you can see on the northwestern sides there's where this attack took place near Krasnodorsk. And then if you look on the other side on the northeast, you'll see Mutishi, where I'm at. So you can see it's not that far at all. I knew some people who lived closer, and they could hear the sirens and all the emergency services vehicles going back and forth on the highway and the main roads there. So yes, it was stone's throw away from me. Fortunately, I wasn't there at the time. There were, but it was a shocking event. It started at 8:57 p.m. Moscow time, so 3 minutes before the concert started. It was during our live broadcast on Friday while we were talking. This unfolded right before. It was the Crocus City Hall. Is a big shopping center with a music hall where there's live band performances, and so the Russian band Picnic was going to perform that night, and that's when these four gunmen showed up, and they were in and out. Oh, excuse me, someone just corrected me. It was 7:57, not 8:57. Excuse me, 7:57.
You're seeing comments I don't see. That's interesting.
No, someone in the other room.
In the room.
Yes, in the room with me heard. So it's like no. It was 7:57, not 8:57. So 7:57. This started, and basically, someone just commented that we are live.
Oh, yeah, we are live.
I thought we were pre-recording for some reason.
Oh, so the countdown. Yeah, I've noticed there's been some issues. Like the countdown doesn't show for you on Friday or Tuesday. Yes. You didn't see the countdown. Everybody else did, but we could also hear your audio during the countdown. Did you see the countdown this time?
Yeah, no, I did not. I thought.
Okay, so that's weird. Maybe because you're in Russia, it's some.
Well, sometimes I don't think it's even I'm in Russia. It's my browser acts up. But anyways, excuse me. So 7:57 Moscow time. The shootings happened, and. It was clear that it was planned. So these were just assholes hired off of Telegram. Apparently there were these Tajik guys. They were immigrants. At least one of them was actually here illegally. His visa had expired. So it's just some guys who were paid, and they weren't even paid much. So it was probably roughly the equivalent of $6,000 each. So they were offered 500,000 rubles each to perform this attack, and it was well planned. They came in. It was clear they're on a timeline. They did not linger. They completely got out of the scene of the crime before the police were able to cordon off the area. So they got in, they got out, and they fled towards the Ukrainian border. They were arrested near Bryansk. So that's right on the border. of Ukraine. That's where it's pretty clear where they're headed to. And so all of them, apparently all 4 alleged shooters have been caught, and apparently a total of 11 people have been arrested. So people who weren't there at the scene of the crime were also arrested. And one of them was actually caught in a photo on March 7th, doing a reconnaissance of the shopping mall before the attack occurred. So now within 2 hours of it, ISIS Central claimed credit for it. And the USA jumped in and said, oh, this was ISIS-K. This was ISIS-K, which is, the Afghanistan cell, which does recruit a lot of Tajiks, because, they're neighbors. It's just, they have a lot of ethnic Tajiks and Tajik nationals in their group. But this was before the gunman had been caught, and the USA just blurted this out. It was ISIS-K. It was very fast. It's like to have that level of knowledge about what happened. So that's a rundown. I'm sorry, I was a little rambling, but that's a rundown of what's happened.
No, that's good. And I mean, that really does tie very succinctly into our topic of imperialism. And, so the question is, what does that mean? Like, what is the context of that terrorist attack? I mean, it's going to be hard for me to articulate, but I'm going to try. So it reminds me of John Mearsheimer was in Australia, maybe a couple years ago at the beginning of the SMO. And he said, he was laying out the issues about, the China rivalry, U.S. rivalry. And he was telling Australians, you're going to end up siding with the U.S. And if you don't, the U.S. can be very nasty, very nasty. And this is the kind of thing he's talking about. If like the Australian government, for instance, would, decide that they're not going to go along with whatever policy the U.S. demands vis-a-vis their anti-China strategy, you're going to have, governments get overthrown. You're going to have dirty tricks, and you might have some terror attacks, to send a message. That's just how the Western imperialists operate. And so to me, ISIS itself was a creation of Western imperialism. And we know from reporting by like Seymour Hersh that in Syria, we had training camps for the terrorists. We trained them, we gave them weapons, and we unleashed them on Syrian society. And so a lot of Tajikistans were there. There was a Uyghur component that was there from China. And we just, we did the same thing in Afghanistan. When the Soviets came in, that's where Al-Qaeda was created. It was a database of intolerant extremist Islamic radicals from all over the globe, a network that the CIA, helped to facilitate and maintain. And they brought in, 10,000, more than 10,000. They brought in tens of thousands of terrorists from around the world to attack the Soviets. So it's standard operating procedure for imperialism. But with this attack, to blame Khorasan, number one seems, Islamic State Khorasan seems like they're telling everybody that it was us because, Islamic State is, a proxy force of Western imperialism. So to people that are informed, it's like, okay, I believe it was them. I mean, I'm sure it was them. But here's the other thing, like these Tajiks, they obviously weren't religious extremists themselves. They weren't suicide attackers. They were people that did it for money. They weren't doing it for religious reasons. They said themselves. So where is the money coming from? And again, I think it's coming from the West. It's coming from, black budgets, probably drug-funded black budgets. Let's see, what else?
Well, the main thing, I think those are all good points you said, a lot of good points. I mean, I'd say one, if you remember early in the war on terror, not so much Afghanistan, because, that was, everybody was in shock about 9/11. And so that was kind of an open check for Bush to do pretty much whatever he wanted in response to it and have a lot of national and international support. But when the Bush administration said, hey, we want to also piggyback off of the Islam hysteria and invade Iraq, there was a lot, if you remember, there was a lot more pushback, especially from European countries. There was a lot. France just said no altogether. And there was even from Spain, there was a lot of anti-American sentiment in Spain and Ireland, in Germany. And what terrorism does is it's used as a tool of blackmail, and over time it does work because because there were basically all those countries that were pushing back against U.S. policy in the Middle East it had varying degrees of terror attacks by quote unquote Al Qaeda, and now what's happened 20 years later? They're all completely in that NATO pocket. There's no pushback against U.S. policy at all from any of those countries that were both politically and on a grassroots level pushing back. And that comment from, I think it was Spanish Fabs, commented just now. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other thing makes me suspicious because, I mean, imagine, Billy Bob Carlo, imagine if you were paying out, I mean, we're not talking huge amounts of money, but it doesn't matter. Like, so you were just selling out these payments of $5,000 to $6,000 to various people to do a terror attack on an American shopping mall. I mean, how long do you think you could plan something like that without the FBI seeing those transactions, know what you're doing, and break down your door? So this wasn't through a Russian financial system. This was, in Tajikistan, possibly Ukraine, third countries. So those are all connected in the SWIFT financial system. And if they used crypto, almost all of those major mainstream crypto exchanges are monitored by American authorities. So I find it very difficult to believe that an attack with this many people being paid, and we're not even talking about supplies, weapons, whatever else they bought with these shady probably crypto payments. It might be invisible to the Russian government because it's occurring outside of Russia, but I doubt they could do this without someone in the U.S. government noticing it. I find that very unlikely now. And also the government can't do anything in 2 hours. Just the fact that in 2 hours, it's extremely detailed explanation.
I thought basically what happened was Islamic State Khorasan took credit for it. And then that is what justified the U.S. to say, aha, see, it was them. They took credit for it. What more do we need to do?
Well, the original ISIS-K state accusation was in that initial New York Times article they quoted on the U.S. government sources. The thing is, it was ISIS Central there wasn't any immediate, that was specifically the ISIS-K cell. So that's the problem. That came from the U.S. government itself. We knew ISIS-K Khorasan was going to do something. We'd warned the Russians, all this other stuff. It's just like, well, even if and here's the thing too, even if they knew, okay, there's this group of guys, we think they're doing something shady. We're keeping an eye on them. But then you see a terror attack. You can't immediately assume that it was that group you were keeping an eye on that did. It might have been a totally unrelated thing, but the U.S. just immediately came out and said, no, that was ISIS-K,
I want to make one final comment before we allow Manuel to guide us in his own direction. But
yes.
So my last comment would be: what about the angle that they wanted these guys to get caught? Because all four of them, the people that hired them were happy and fine with them getting caught because they all four stayed together. They all four stayed in the same car. It seems like operationally they could have done a lot better of a job of not getting caught. So do you think that's plausibility or?
Well, here's the thing. So they were, like you said, these guys were not suiciders. They had self-preservation in mind. They didn't inflict the maximum level of casualties. They got in and out on a timeline. The thing is, if they were patsies to being set up, I would think the most logical way to make them patsies would be to give them a plan that was doomed to fail right at the start point. So they would be caught at the mall itself. The problem is that they went towards, it's very obvious where they were going. That does, whether or not there's any smoking gun evidence, it does implicate Ukraine. Yeah. So if it's so that raises some questions. But
let me just add a few
Carlo
things.
Doesn't want you to talk.
First of all, with 9/11, America was warned about 9/11 happening. The Bush administration was warned. That's what's led to a lot of the conspiracy theories. Number two, the the terrorist who appeared on the gunman who appeared on the videotape said he wasn't paid. That's typical CIA practice. They're very frugal. Number three, I agree with everything that Scott Ritter said. It's the CIA and it's the Banderite Nazis, and they were headed in that direction. And it's lucky they didn't make it to the Ukrainian border because they would have been killed. All of them would have been. They wouldn't have been paid, and they would have been killed.
That's interesting. I like that.
By
That's good
the CIA, and I agree with everything. Scott Ritter's interpretation, 100%, except that he has much more detail.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
So, Manuel, I mean, I can do a better job of trying to tie that into our broader discussion on imperialism, but I'm going to throw it over to you and wherever you want to take it. If you want to talk about the current events or if you want to just talk broadly about imperialism.
I don't know much about that current event. It just happened. It could be many things, I think. What you just said, I think, is highly possible, but I wouldn't be sure. I hope you are not sure at that. I hope you're not sure at 100%. It is exactly that. So, but yeah, it's highly possible. It could be some. I guess it could be some simple terrorists that hated the Russian state because they felt repressed. Because of their religion or whatever. But I think that in the current situation of the war in Ukraine, it is highly possible that the Ukraine and, of course, the U.S. government could be behind that. So, yes. So
on the broader topic of imperialism, there's two schools of thought. Like, so from the Marxist-Leninist perspective, which I might be the only adherent of on this roundtable, but essentially you can't distinguish capitalism from imperialism. So imperialism would be the highest stage of capitalism, whereas a lot of people view imperialism as just a strong power trying to, exert their influence against other smaller powers. And to them, that's the liberal definition of what imperialism is.
Yeah.
So where do you fall? You want to kind of define imperialism, your working definition, just so we know.
I would like to know, Carlo and Jan, what are their political position? How do they define themselves? I don't want to really argue. I just want to know. I'm curious.
If you were to the show earlier, Manuel, you would have learned that Carlo, at 76 years old, isn't old enough to have yet defined himself. And I'm not sure about Ian, but I'll let them speak for themselves.
Well, I'm a few years younger than Carlo, and I don't know if I would actually have a concrete definition either. But Carlo, maybe you could answer first.
I would. There's a book by Richard Drennan called Facing West, and he articulates how Western imperialism, from the Monroe Doctrine on, is expressed in the literature of American literature, and I think that kind of adequately manifest destiny and that sort of thing, that kind of adequately defines imperialism for me from the American's perspective. That's why actually living in America, I'm not American. I not in any kind of real sense, but in a kind of sense of who I am. That's why when Todd Doherty, who watches the program sometimes, said no true revolutionary would abandon the people, and my answer was, well, I think they've abandoned me, and I just it's a kind of mindset for me. It's a kind of epistemology in the sense of how they can know the world, and how people know the world in the U.S. is that they're the superior. It's a superior power. It does no wrong. It's pure as the driven snow, and everything it does is good, and when you question it, you're just simply a liar a fool, uh, um, uh, and and ultimately, if I ever run into you, I'm going to kill you. That's the general U.S. population's sense of the imperialist empire that they live under. But other than that, I mean, you hear about imperial Japan, you hear about imperial China. Well, they have cases. I mean, when I did a year's study on Ezra Pound, the poet, I had to read a couple of books on Chinese history, and the era was just that. It was a consolidation, a gradual consolidation into modern China, and I think imperialism was a good definition for the time. I mean, for those times, so the Han Dynasty, the Warring States period, all of that stuff. So I would take the broader perspective. Then I would lean toward the broader perspective rather than the more narrow perspective of it happening, of it occurring with the age of discovery in Europe, the age of enlightenment, and 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 the and the absolute acceleration. And I want to point this out: the acceleration under the calculus by Newton and Leibniz of science and technology, which has now become the lingua franca of the world, and your success, your progress depends on how your epistemology as a people, how you can look at the world. And the Chinese, through Confucius, if you will let me say that, have a big leg up on India, which also wants to develop, but doesn't have the same epistemological roots. So anyway, I don't know if that means any. I don't know.
Manuel, was
That's
that
just
were those explanations helpful?
A little bit, but my question was more about like, I know you, Billy Bob, you define yourself as a communist, a Marxist. Me, I'm a libertarian. I believe in legitimate private property, the non-aggression principle, and free markets. What I wanted to know first is, Jan and Carlo, how do they define themselves politically? Are you Marxist, communist, or something else? And I'm not asking that to argue. I just want to, I'm curious, and I want to know from which perspective you come when you analyze even.
I'm 48, and I only about like 8 years ago was I comfortable labeling myself as a communist. Like I was in a process, a very long process of trying to understand and figure things out and ground myself. So I mean, I understand if Carlo's too young, and Ian is not quite yet prepared to actually put a label. But I mean, they could probably explain where they're at.
I would say my main stance in the context of contemporary politics today, I would say I'm a regular guy. I would like stability more than anything else. I think in an ideal world, I don't believe in an international order. I don't really even agree with Putin when he talked to Tucker Carlson, and he basically brought up standard globalist ideas that there's an international system, there's an international courts, there's all these international. It's kind of actually interesting to hear Putin himself speak, because people tend to put words in his mouth. It's like, oh, Putin stands for multipolarity and all that. He really doesn't. He's big on all the ICC and all those international institutions, if they weren't, corrupted, manipulated, and weaponized. I think that's a pretty fair description of Putin. He's big on international cooperation. So I'm more of the belief that in an ideal world, there wouldn't be conflicts, and individual citizens would be within reason, be pretty free to travel around, work where they want, to live where they want, whether that's in the country they were born in or somewhere else. Reasonable border controls. There's no iron curtains. There's no barriers preventing people from moving.
Do you believe in private property? Do you believe in private property?
In private property?
Do you worship the invisible hand, Ian? Do you worship?
Well, I don't believe in laissez-faire economics. I think and the reason I say that is because I think in the 20th century, in the late 19th century or in 20th century, people did start to experiment with command economies with limited, with varying degrees of success, let's say. But we're at the point where not only is a command economy optional? I would say it's almost mandatory, because when you don't centrally control the flow of resources and commerce, you get situations where you just run it. Oh, I'm sorry, that one company that had a monopoly on baby formula had mold or whatever, so now there's just no baby formula in the whole country. Sorry, you have to airlift baby formula from Europe, which I think is a little embarrassing. That's a case of, there does need to be some intervention. There is modern Keynesian. I would say I agree. I wouldn't say I'm very knowledgeable on it, but in general principle, I agree with modern fiat currency and Keynesian economics, that you do need a central bank of some the supply of money, because before that, I think people forget, basically every country in the world had this vicious cycle of recession, of bubbles and recessions, and that was just, in some countries, like the USA, which has an abundance of farmland, that would just cause a lot of poverty, and in other countries that doesn't have an abundance of farmland, that would cause actual famines when you have those bubbles. So we do benefit from a very sophisticated modern system.
Okay.
Whether
but
or not
you believe that some limited form of private property are acceptable? Like, I don't know, I own my house, which is a small farm with 4 acres of land. I save money by doing overtime, and I bought it, and I grow up raspberry. Do you think it's legitimate, or that the state should confiscate it one day if they want?
Well, I think we need to. Well, I do actually agree with the Marxists that we do need to some extent, not necessarily that we should confiscate property, but we do need to differentiate between personal property and private properties. Like, my house is my property, my car is my property. No one's going to break. The NKVD isn't going to break in and steal your toothbrush, which is what Trump makes it sound like. So. When it comes, maybe not. I mean, if you want to start a small business, by all means, start a small business, start a company, start controlling your, seize the means of production, by all means. But I think when it comes to certain industries, defense industry, agriculture, there are certain industries that should be controlled by the state, because if the state doesn't control it, that just means a different state will buy it and control it. You should control you need to control your own food supply. I think that's
I would say, I'm just, the way I see it for myself, that you're a kind of a socialist, but moderate socialist.
Yes, I think
He's
I would.
big on labels.
Yes, I think I am on most economic issues. I lean more left than right. I think that's a correct statement.
Thank you, Carlo.
Oh, well, you have to understand human nature. And in the U.S., we have a lot of vicious murderers, and they're psychopaths in their positions of power. They don't allow anything. We have regulation. It's not abided by. People take bribes all the time. You have, for instance, especially in well, I don't want to point out any states, but you have these large plants, oil processing plants, whatever, utilities, whatever you want, and they pollute terribly. And who lives around them? All these poor African Americans who die in their 50s. And there's regulation that's not abided by, and they die. And nobody, and the people at the top who are getting the money and taking the bribes, they don't give a shit. So you got to understand human nature. If you're going to spout libertarian stuff, you got to read books on psychopaths, and you got to. In fact, if you go to the DSM-4, it will tell you what the 8 properties of a psychopath are. Victoria Nuland has every one of them.
I agree.
Joe Biden has every one of them. So the only answer is, if you're not willing to kill all the psychopaths, don't feed me any bullshit about laissez-faire, because they dominate laissez-faire, and thousands of people, millions of people are dying. Yes, Africa and South America should unite. Nasser was right. Nkrumah was right. Thomas Sankara was right. Traore is right. Lumumba is right. Because if they don't unite, the fucking vicious animals that live in Europe and the United States are going to try to devour them. They've killed millions of Africans, and we're coming to a kind of new awareness. And I want to, with Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger and Sudan and Eritrea and Ethiopia with their new Chinese dam and all of that. They're coming to in Zimbabwe. They're coming and South Africa. They're coming to their senses about this, and they're not going to be exploited anymore. And if they unite, then they can really take on this, frankly, weakened United States and Europe. And believe me, Europe is vicious, but the United States is far more vicious, far more animalistic. These people are you heard Kushner, that idiot, Jared Kushner, about Gaza. Jesus fucking Christ. That's Nazi talk.
Yes.
That's Goebbels. So,
if you ask the question, Daniel, be careful. You might get an answer.
We need people to take over. We need people who aren't afraid to cut off the heads like they did in France. That's what we need.
Thank you.
Now. And then we can talk regulation.
Okay.
Because these fuckers are killers. Anyway.
I thank you. I agree with many things you said. Of course, I would disagree that it's the result of laissez-faire, but that's another discussion. For my definition of imperialism is the fact that you use the violence of the state in order to achieve the conquest of markets, resource that can be politically also. In the sense, the U.S. have been imperialist for I would say nearly 150 years. 50 years. The First World War was an imperialist war. The Second World War was also an imperialist war, even though the medias and the movies tried to show us, no, it was a good, noble war. No, it was imperialistic. So I agree that Lenin's definition of, when he defined imperialism, he explained that it's the merge of private interest and the state. That's where I fully agree with that. So Lenin thinks that the problem is private property. Me, I would rather think that the problem is the intervention of the state on the side of those so-called capitalists. I think that if the state has any role to play, it should be to defend legitimate private property. And I have already told you, Billy Bob, that I consider that right now in the world, I would say 95% of the wealth of the billionaire is not legitimate. Otherwise, the state should maybe defend individuals against all kind of aggression and be the arbiter of contract, but really nothing more. That's how I define myself. So I think I recognize that imperialism that is happening in the world, probably the same thing as you do. So right now, the US created a proxy war against Russia. I think it's imperialism. They don't want to. They want to break Russia in part and dominate and exploit it. The same thing. The First World War. It was a rivalry of imperialism, mainly between Germany and the British Empire. The Second World War, I think, for me, Nazism, the National Socialism, Hitler he was representing German imperialism. Though I think I specialize about that issue. Hitler recognized that the First World War happened because the Kaiser challenged British imperialism. So Hitler said, okay, we are not going to challenge British imperialism. We're gonna attack Eastern Europe and make our German Empire in Eastern Europe. But British imperialism could not even tolerate that. That's why British imperialism transformed what could have been a regional war into a full-blown world war for the second time. So, yeah, that's how I see imperialism. What the U.S. have been doing since 1945, it's imperialism. They provoked Japan to attack them in 1941 because they would not tolerate a Japanese empire in China or in the Pacific. They wanted them to be the dominant empire. So what they've been doing since 1945 in Iraq, Vietnam, it's always imperialism.
I would add, though, I disagree with the notion that imperialism is exclusively state power, because this is particularly true in the USA. I mean, one could argue that there was a point when there was a mix of state power and corporate power. But I mean, especially in the early days, I mean, if you look at the crushing of the American labor movement in the late 19th century and early 20th century, I mean, that wasn't the army. I mean, it was sometimes the army, but it was mostly militias, National Guard. It was private. The Pinkertons were private mercenaries. Yeah. So at what point?
Pinkertons.
Right, the Pinkertons. Even in the absence of a state military, you can exercise imperial power just with privately funded.
I would just not define a labor conflict as imperialism, but I agree that.
Let me expand on that then.
Go.
We talked about Smedley Butler last time, right?
Yeah.
The high-priced muscle man, not for the government, but for private industry. That's what he was talking about. He was down there in South America and Central America for Brown and Root, for DuPont, for Remington, for all the big companies. The government is just a tool of big business. Mm-hmm. And that's what Ian is is expressing, is that we don't have a government here. We just have a bunch of wealthy industrialists, the military industrial complex, for example, big pharma, for example, who exploit and own the government. That with Citizens United, if you're aware of that law down here in the U.S., as much money can flow into political campaigns as you want. Like, of course, you can buy a congressman for as little as $20,000, $30,000. A senator is $70,000. Yeah. Plus, you got to send all of his
United Fruit Company
Ivy League schools.
United Fruit Company bought a coup in Guatemala. British Petroleum bought a coup in Iran. So
I agree, but the state as its role.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
I mean,
but the U.S. government.
There's no government, in other words. There's no government. It's all business. It's all vicious psychopaths. So to talk about government being involved, it's nonsense. It's all psychopaths.
Okay, we got your. I'm very sympathetic to that view. Manuel, what's your response?
I tend to mostly agree. I would just think that because basically government is an abstraction because only individual exists. Society doesn't exist. Nation state doesn't exist. Only individuals, matter, energy exists. So what is the government? It's a group of individuals that have a monopoly on violence. They have the exclusive right to initiate violence against peaceful person. I mean, that's for me the definition of what is a government.
But that's at the behest of corporations.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, as a libertarian, I define mainly two kind of person: the people who will respect the non-aggression principle, and those who don't. So, of course, a group of individuals called a corporation could do evil stuff, absolutely. But without the presence of a huge state that is legitimate by still by most people. Most people still give legitimacy to the U.S. government in the United States. As I said, yes, a corporation could do bad stuff, but when there is a state that is terrible things, they will always use it. I just said if we would not legitimize the state as we do, corporation would be a lot weaker. Because I wouldn't see a corporation telling its shareholders, "Hey, we have to invade Iraq because we want the oil or whatever." It's gonna cost the shareholders hundreds of billions of dollars because they don't have it. But if they can force the taxpayers, or they can force it to the people in the form of inflation or national debt, it's a lot easier for them.
So this is a discussion that I engage with a lot, in social media, and so we have two fundamental ideas. So one idea is that the state is the problem, and we don't need the state, and individuals should learn to accept, this non-aggression principle, and if they did that, then we wouldn't have a need for a state. And, we could evolve, as a species past this abhorrent idea that certain people ought to be, endowed with the power to initiate violence against other peaceful people. Yeah. So that's one framing of things. My personal framing of things is that the state is absolutely necessary. And to talk about societies existing without a state is a waste of time because it's utopian and it's impossible.
But I agree that if the state has to exist, its role should be like to protect individuals against or to enforce the non-aggression principle, if I can say that.
Yeah, but the modern state was built for the psychopath.
I agree.
It's not built for normal people.
I agree.
If you want to go back to Mossadegh in 1953, Norman Schwarzkopf's father was the bag man to the Shah. So he was taking tons of money, not from the government, but from private corporations to step in when they overthrew Mossadegh. And it's, that's not the state. It's the state is a sham. It's just a basic puppet for the money power. It's all money oriented.
Yeah, a corporation will give money to politicians, and politicians will take money from the taxpayer. They will inflate the money supply, raise the national debt to give a lot more money to those corporations by killing people, by stealing resources, by enslaving people. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and the American population, being the ninnies they are, they're perfectly happy with that.
I'm not sure they are all perfectly happy.
No, believe me, they think they're living in a utopia.
So
even the ones that are being really put upon and abhor, they do. They think this is utopia.
So let me articulate an argument that might come up against what Manuel's trying to say. So let's talk about 1949 in China, when the Civil War was won by Mao, and he found himself in a situation where the average life expectancy of a male in China was between 35 and 40 years. There was rampant drug abuse, rampant illiteracy, rampant prostitution. I mean, all kinds of social ills due to 100 years, the century of humiliation and the forced importation of opium, by Britain into China. So he found himself governing this huge land, 400 million people, that it was a basket case. It was a total mess. Mm-hmm. So if we take Manuel's advice, we're going to do nothing about that. We're going to downsize the state. We're going to do our best to make people follow the golden rule. To me, that's just not serious. That's not serious. It's not a serious ideology. So if we're concerned with progress, if we're concerned with advancing humanity, progressing humanity past, and helping humanity live better lives, longer lives, healthier lives, more enriched lives. That's going to take society, working to these objectives, to progress to those objectives. It's going to take planning. So, Mao instituted the 5-year plans, and very quickly he did tremendous and massive improvements in China. And we can see right now today, the culmination of those plans. And China still has these 5-year plans. And so it's absolutely necessary. So a minarchist, right? The minarchist argument that Manuel was putting forth would never in a million years have created this kind of massive success that we have seen communist China attain, thanks to their central planning and their non-dogmatic, pragmatic approach to improving people's lives. Thanks for that soapbox, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the show now.
I want to make an observation on all of this. So, when specifically about leftists, American leftists and European leftists. So there's Marxists. There's factions of leftists, but I've noticed the mainstream leftist is the lesser of two evils, liberal kind of guy, and they're the guys who constantly say, "Oh, I want the revolution. We need a revolution," but they hate every successful revolution that ever happened in any context. So it's like, well, because, Mao did this, Stalin did this, Lenin did this, blah, blah, blah. I have all this long list of complaints of all the stuff they did wrong, some of which are legitimate grievances, some are not so legitimate. But the point is, so it's just like, so you keep saying you want a revolution, but you hate every revolution that actually happened. So it's just like, that wasn't real communism. It's like, it's no true Scott.
So that's a very in the West, in the United States, that is a very popular ideology. It's the anything but socialism socialists, or the ultra leftists. I just call them fake leftists because their advocacy is very compatible with the interests of imperialism, which is to maintain their dominance and crush any kind of democratic or socialist movement that threatens their control. But I'm heartened because, again, the Chinese Communist Party of China is 100 million strong, and it's the most powerful economic and military force on the planet. And the U.S. is going to be displaced, and we see that happening in real time. But Manuel, we're monopolizing the conversation. So I would like to hear a response. This idea that minicurism is going to always and everywhere be the most ideal form of state, I think is flawed if we're actually concerned with progressing humanity and benefiting people's lives.
I'm not an expert on the history of China. I know more about I know more about the Russian Revolution than the Chinese Revolution of 1949. And I think that you and me, we would have major disagreement of the interpretation of fact of what happened there, which would make, I think, a conversation to be difficult. I'm not saying you're evil or stupid. No.
You're welcome to.
You probably believe in good faith. Me, I believe that the Chinese Revolution lead to awful things, but I'm not saying that there could not have been some good intention, and I'm certainly not denying that what was in China when Mao took power, that I recognize, there were a lot of problems caused by Western imperialism, or I think centuries. China, I think, used to be an empire with, I think, a weak puppet emperor and many warlords. And then I remember from a course that there were all the power that existed in China before the revolution. I think there was the emperor, the warlords, and the and Western imperialism, and British Empire imposed the opium thing. I know about that because I I know how the evil of British empires. And most people don't know the evil of British imperialism because it would break the narrative that World War II was a good war. So that's why all the awful stuff that British imperialism did is not known. So yeah, I agree that there was some problem in China. But what for me, when I said I support a minimal government, that doesn't mean that we must not do things. If you want to make things better, to have progress, I totally agree with that. It's the way you're gonna do it. It's when the state does it, the state will attract the worst psychopath. Uh, and for me, it doesn't work. That doesn't mean that the social change you want, helping people, I all agree with that. I just say it has to be done voluntarily. You know that I reject the welfare state and socialism, but I don't reject the idea of helping. It's the way it's done. So there's an important.
Is that serious though? I mean, can you say that you want, if you say you want it done only voluntarily, that kind of suggests that even if one person in the society dissents, that whatever project it is, if one person says I don't want to do it, it can't get done. So to me,
No.
an all voluntary society is utopian, because you're always going to have people that don't want to go along with whatever it is. So they're going to refuse to pay their taxes.
I understand.
Whatever. And so you're kind of just limiting what is possible. It's a huge constraint on the improvement that would otherwise be possible. And to me, I think that these principles that you claim are sacrosanct about, property rights and just allowing one person to object and to cancel, whatever kind of project it is.
Not to cancel it, to opt out.
Yeah.
It's very different.
In practice, how would that look?
Okay, let's say most people want socialism. Okay, but you voluntarily assemble and you do it, and the people who just don't want it, you left them alone. You just don't point gun at them. That's all.
Yeah.
And of course, if you consider that, because I know that if there was, let's say, a socialist revolution, of course the billionaires wouldn't want to get in. I get it. If you want to expropriate their illegitimate wealth they have acquired, I have no problem with that. So
let me try and say I can articulate maybe what Manuel's concern is, and I can we'll use an example from the past. So I know in the past, me and Manuel have had discussions, and he is, in his mind, what he's thinking about is the small landowners that were known as the kulaks in the Soviet Union, and how they were repressed because they controlled the agricultural industry, and they didn't want to lose that power and control to the state. So the state was like, hey, we have famines every 5 years. We have a famine in this country. Our agricultural system is not good enough to accommodate the industrialization that we need to do to survive as a nation, because the fascists are going to be invading us. So kulaks, we've got to upgrade and modernize our system. And the kulaks said, fuck you, we're not going to do that shit. And they came to blows, and the kulaks lost. So Manuel thinks, if we have a revolution in Canada and in the United States, they're going to come looking for his property. And he's afraid that that's what socialism is. It's about, he's at risk of losing his piece of land because communists don't protect property rights. So that's my interpretation of
my piece of land is so small and produce almost nothing. So I don't think I would be a target.
I don't think so either, and I think it's an unfounded concern, but that's kind of what I'm picking up from my discussions with you. And I know our mutual friend too would point to the kulak issue and say, that's a blight on socialism. And I'm saying there's another side to that argument. You know, it's about there's things that we have to do as a society if we're going to progress, if we're going to survive, and we can't allow somebody to opt out of that, because then the whole project, the whole enterprise is going to be defeated, and all the sacrifice that it took to get to that point will have been for nothing.
On that we have to disagree. I think Carlo and Jan would like to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry.
I just wanted to say what you're talking about, the communes, the Soviet communes. But I want to say one thing that Manuel brought up that I think is flipped. And he said that psychopaths gravitate toward the state. No, concepts of the state come out of the psychopaths. They conceive them. We have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and it's all trash. It's not. There's no meaning behind it. There's no reality behind it. It's all created by these Enlightenment ninnies who are interpreting French Enlightenment and for themselves. It was basically landed white men. Period. That's it. And after long struggles, one of which Ian pointed out, the labor struggle in the late 19th century, which with 30,000 people involved in labor movements were killed, that you got a little bit. And even now, if you scratch below the surface, you see how little that is. You have Biden, for example, who goes on about bragging about how he brought in these criminal justice laws, which lock up predominantly poor Black and Latino kids for draconian.
So, Carlo, you're suggesting there's two different conceptualizations of the state. So the state, as Manuel is conceiving it, is resulted from, Western oligarchs, creating this idea, and that there's other ideas about what governance is that has nothing to do with this Western conception. And so it's kind of like two competing definitions of what a state is.
No, I wasn't going there. I was just want to say that he said that the psychopaths gravitate toward the state. And I want to say, no, they create the state that suits them. And I'm saying,
but that doesn't have to be, right?
Of America were psychopaths.
But you're suggesting there's alternative ways.
And this is the key to imperialism. They had their own epistemology. That is how they could know the world. And they wanted to impose that how on the rest of the world. And starting with the Native Americans and the slaves.
Yeah. Is there an alternative way to conceptualize of a state that is different from the tool of the wealthy and powerful? Because I mean, that's the question.
I think that's what we all want. Am I wrong, Billy Bob?
Well, that's the science of socialism. That's what Leninism and Marxism is about. It's the science of, overthrowing the oligarch state and replacing it with a government of, by, and for the vast majority. That's what Marxism, Leninism is. Libertarians say that, the best we can hope for is, minicurism, the smallest state possible that just enforces contract rights and doesn't tax because taxation is theft, etc.
We want to remove the monopoly of violence in the hands of the rich, the wealthy, and the psychopaths.
So let's think. I do have a question for Manuel. So on the international stage, since no state functions in a vacuum, so let's say we have this, hypothetical libertarian, laissez-faire, no monopoly and violence type state. Now, now let's say I am a foreign investor. Let's say I'm just a billionaire in China, UK. It doesn't even matter what country I'm from. But let's just say I say, well, okay, here's this country that has very lax regulations. What is preventing me from just buying everything and controlling that state, even though I'm not even I just have a lot of money and I want to buy up, for example, I want to buy all of your farmland. I want to buy up all your oil industry, your gold industry, and just extract it for myself. What mechanisms in the libertarian state would exist to prevent me from doing that? From just using brunt force and money to have a de facto monopoly on violence for myself?
That's a good question. I don't see how necessarily suddenly all the people living in a libertarian country would suddenly want to sell everything they have. If they want to, I don't see really any problem. But if the idea that if it would appear to such a danger, I guess people would probably talk among themselves and expose probably the danger of that. But when somebody buys something, when you own a land or a company or a factory, you're responsible of when you operate it to do it respectfully to others, because otherwise you don't respect the private property of others. Like Carlo was saying earlier, that some company were polluting, but pollution is a disrespect of the property right of others. But when you can buy the state on your side, the state that should have punished you for polluting instead don't do it. So,
well, I mean, to answer your question about why people would want to sell, well, let's look at an example of what Walmart did to people, what Amazon did. So they didn't generally. I mean, there have been cases, of course, corporations is using mafia-style tactics to force people to close. But what they would do, so like what Walmart would do, is they would move into a neighborhood and they would sell at a loss. Like they would literally sell at a loss. That store would lose money, and they could afford it.
I prefer that. I think it's more realistic. What you're saying, go ahead.
And then they do that for a few years until every local business is shut down, and then they can charge whatever they want, because now it's a food desert. Walmart is effectively the only business left in multiple industries. So then a person who was a small business owner is now basically an employee at Walmart. So I mean, it's like, is this an improvement to allow this tech? Is this an improvement? Is the community better off allowing whoever has enough money to control it?
I think I probably see Walmart a lot more positively as you do. The problem that there are, you're gonna tell me, there's a lot of poor people working for Walmart and buying at Walmart. I wouldn't blame Walmart itself, because the Walmart is not the Federal Reserve that cause inflation. Walmart doesn't tax you sometime at 50%, and Walmart is not the state that put you in debt or cause all the shit. Walmart offers you a job. And even today, somebody working at the minimum wage at Walmart could probably buy, in the form of a bag of rice, enough calories for many days in 1 hour of work. I'm not saying it's perfect, but compared to pre-industrial, I think it's really I don't have really any problem with Walmart. I understand that the transition. If the transition between the mom and pops shops, the small, I understand that. If it's all done voluntarily, I have no problem. Now I'm asking the question: was it done voluntarily? It was done in the context where the state was intervening, when the state was making people a lot poorer by what I named imperialism, central banking, inflation, tax, all that corporatism. And yes, there are a lot of corporations that benefit from monopolies, in a sense, by the state. Just look during the COVID thing. I don't know how you all see the COVID, the lockdowns, how you were. Look, I'm not an anti-vax. I'm not a conspiracy theory. I think COVID was real and that it was okay to, be careful. But I think it was highly exaggerated. I mean, here in Quebec, we got the probably the worst intervention. We got lockdowns. We got passport for vaccination. But what happened a few years later? A lot of small business lost, went bankrupt. I think it's the case also in the US, because what happened is that people couldn't work, but Amazon and Walmart were authorized to continue to work, so they made a fortune during the COVID. I think I read that the few years of COVID saw a transfer of wealth from the middle class to the insane wealthy billionaire. It's like for something like 4 trillions. But it was not. Come on, don't tell me it was free market. It's the state that say, hey, you don't have you don't have the right to go to work. You don't have the right to open your small business. Oh, but yeah, Amazon can continue to deliver. Yeah, no surprise, Amazon. The guy from Amazon that maybe had a fortune of, I don't know, 40 billion now has a fortune of 100, 200 billion. Yeah, thanks to the government. Anyway, I like Amazon, I like Walmart, but I don't want them to benefit from the state, and they do benefit. And during the COVID, the government printed so much money. The inflation was look at housing cost in the last since 2020, in the last 4 years, housing cost.
So,
Buying a house.
Yeah.
Let me bring up an example on the COVID, since you brought up COVID. So I'll raise a very important point. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has no law enforcement. Well, I mean, they're not a legislative body. So the CDC can tell people, hey, we would like it if you did these things, and sometimes the state governments did, in fact, muscle in and use police powers, used force to force people to comply with their masking and social distancing and lockdowns. That is held true. But I would say 90% of the enforcement in the COVID era was coming from corporations themselves. Because if corporations just say, hey, you know what, F you, we're not going to force our employees to, take a drug they don't want to. We're not going to force them to do things they don't want to. But the thing is, they all did. Now, I'll bring up actually an example from Russia. So Putin did sign a law saying that you cannot force anyone to take a vaccination. And even though the Russian vaccine has far fewer controversies surrounding it than ours did, they still did pass a law, state intervention saying you cannot force people, take this jab or get fired. You can't do that. They made that illegal. So what is preventing a corporation from saying, hey, you know what? My buddy is making this pharmaceutical. I want to help my buddy make money. So I'm going to force all my employees to take this jab, or, free market, push them out the door. What is preventing corporate, in that exact scenario, with the CDC not being a law enforcement agency, not being a legislative power, they can just suggest these corporations do things, and the corporations voluntarily did them. What would prevent that from happening? What would have prevented that from happening in the USA specifically, or any libertarian country?
Okay, for me, I think by when we talk about voluntary association, yeah, if a business wants you to be vaccinated or to wear a mask, I think they should have that right. But I don't.
But they're individuals. What happened to individual freedom? If every employer says, you have to get this jab, how is it voluntary?
I really
can't get a job.
I really don't think that in a free market,
But they did.
Oh,
It is a free market. The CDC does not have any enforcement power. Corporations could have said, no, we're not going to do that. And there was nothing stopping them from doing that, but they did it anyway.
Yeah, but I work for a corporation that didn't force us to get vaccine. So.
Okay, but there were a lot that did. And
Yeah, I think it's wrong aesthetically. I think that as a libertarian, I believe in the right to discriminate. You have the right to not associate with someone for whatever reason you want. It's not a form of violence. Now, I think that since the COVID was highly exaggerated, I think there was incentive from the big pharma corporation that sleep with government to sell vaccine more than they needed to. So, which I think
was free. I got vaccinated for free.
Yeah, but it was paid by tax. I mean, the corporation were selling the vaccine to the government probably at a very inflated price.
Yeah, but 1.1 million Americans, 1,100,000 Americans died from COVID. 85 to 90% were unvaccinated. If everyone had taken the advice of the Steve Bannons and the Donald Trumps or whatever of this world, the number of Americans that would have died was estimated at 10 to 15 million.
Maybe I don't know, because I'm really not an expert on that. I don't know.
Well, I'm just citing the literature on it. Now you can say, well, the literature was bought by the corporations, and maybe it was.
I said it was really hard for me. It was really hard to know.
But if you're going to choose between a vaccine and death, what the fuck are you talking about here? You know, that was the argument I had. I've got relatives that didn't get vaccinated, and they all got very, very sick. Now, fortunately, they were young and they came through. But Jesus Christ, you know, what choice is that? I don't give a fuck who's demanding that I get vaccinated. If I'm going to die if I don't get vaccinated, I'm going to get vaccinated. I've been vaccinated all my life. Measles, chickenpox. Yeah. You know, it's another vaccination. You know, you want to get into this scientific paradigm so badly, you fucking have to trust it to a certain point. Sure, the corporations grift. And it's not true that the corporations don't tax you. They do. They arbitrarily raise prices. And that's a tax. I mean, you buy a package of ramen noodles for $2. How much does it cost the fucking corporation to produce it? 2 cents. That's a tax, baby. Jesus Christ. This stupid shit about government and all that it's just beyond the pale for me. You know,
got Carlo going.
Listen, I'll give you an example. I'll give you a good example. Christianity. The Native Americans were forced to go to Christian schools, and the slaves were imbibed with Christianity. Now, I had a good friend. He's passed away now. He was the first black anchor in Cleveland. His name Bill Clark, wonderful jazz DJ, and brilliant guy. I make a great fried chicken. So we would sit down. Bill would come over, and Duke Amir, who's a sax player who lived in the same apartment I built, and another friend of mine, Joe Brennan, and we would get together. And we have confabs like this. And, you know, Bill would say, as long as the black people, you can't pull them away from Christianity, there's no hope. And he meant it. So they've been so imbibed with Christianity. You go to the Native American population. Had a friend, Harvey Arden, who was very close to Leonard Peltier, visited him many times and wrote several books on Native Americans. And he talked about the resilience and the resistance of Native Americans to Christianity. It was a different epistemology. It was a different way of knowing the world. But it's like, as long as you have these criteria like Christianity and capitalism and all that stuff imbued in people's heads, you know, there's going to be a certain level of resistance when they think they're being rebellious. And this gets back to COVID. people thought they were being rebellious, and then they're laying in their deathbed and going, "Well, doc, can't you do anything for me now?" And no, of course, their lungs were filled with liquid, and they were beyond help. And I think, you have to address the stupidity of the general population. That's they need. I don't want to say they need guidance, because that sounds paternalistic, but they need help. They're not sophisticated. They're dumb enough to follow some idiot's advice. Will bleach work? And he did say that. I mean, it's on record, and all these quacks that went on the Jimmy Dore show, people, doctors who weren't even epidemiologists and had a number of nervous breakdowns over their lifetimes. And
So I want to mention
listening to that.
to the YouTube censors that we all believe in COVID and we all believe in vaccines. I'm vaccine. I take the vaccine regularly every other day. So we are pro-vax, pro-COVID, just for the YouTube censors. That's kind of a joke. So we started out talking current events. We rolled the current events into a broader discussion on imperialism. And now it's kind of devolved into this, two sides about our conceptualization of the state. And so Manuel blames the state itself and think the state is the problem. And the solution is to abolish the state and work towards
to reduce it.
To reduce it and to achieve as much of an all voluntary society as possible.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm thinking the rest of us we all articulate our opposition to that argument differently, but I would say that, basically it's utopian. It's utopian because of reality. And the reality that, you have a violent authoritarian class that's currently in charge. If you were going to overthrow them and create anything different that doesn't benefit their interest, they're going to resist that. You're going to have to fight against them. You're going to have to throw them out of power using a revolutionary means, or at least the threat of force, if not actual force. And then you're going to have to repress them because they're going to be trying very hard to have a counter revolution and to take back power. That's just the basic, Marxist Leninism view of why you need a communist party in power that does, repress the bourgeoisie that was just thrown out of power. And you can't just allow an all voluntary society. And the other thing is, an all voluntary society itself is utopic. So I do like this, and I make this argument a lot. But if we look at Tak Lee here talking about, is that sensible? Does it really work? Like, are we really supposed to just make sure everybody can opt out of, traffic laws? How does society function if everybody has the opportunity? That's just not realistic. It's not even articulable about how you can do it. So to me, it's just totally utopian, and it's a waste of time. And the only reason why we ought to be spending our time on it is because it's in the minds of so many people. To me, I mean, I'm being really bluntly honest. The only reason why we even should be having this discussion is only because so many Westerners have this idiocy in their mind. Sorry, Manuel, but that's my honest thought. And it's just, and I think it's an indoctrination. It's a Western liberal indoctrination that has no relationship and no use to actual progress. It's an impediment to actual progress, and it maintains the status quo because it's unrealistic and it's a waste of time. I don't know.
Yes, we disagree on that, but I want to say that I agree that what you call the ruling class, that we should make a revolution and repress their power. I agree with you on that.
So here's a question. So the title of the show is, what does it mean to be anti-imperialist? So let's apply that to the state. So how can a libertarian state prevent itself from being a victim of imperialism by someone else, particularly a larger state with more capital and more means?
I love that question. But
we'll answer it.
But a country like, let's say, the United States, I would say between the Civil War and the First World War. I mean, at that time, the U.S. was not that much imperialist. It was on the rise, unfortunately. But I think we saw a lot of progress in that period. It was not perfect. I know that there was the repression against the labor movement. I disagree with that because I think that union should exist. But we talk about imperial, how to protect oneself against imperialism. Of course, I believe that the people have the right to defend themselves and to if the state should exist, I think it's its role to protect the nation. I have no problem with that. But an army, if it has to exist, its role to protect the nation, not to attack other nation, and that's often the problem. A lot of people believe that the Canadian or the U.S. Army is there to protect us. They believe that myth. No, they don't. They protect the ruling class, and they are used for imperialism. That's a big problem because people. I think we all have.
We all agree on that problem, and we see we identify that problem. Marxist Leninists identify that as the problem, and their solution is, to me, it seems like the only solution is the pragmatic approach to that problem, whereas the idealism of libertarianism just, kind of says, well, we have to get everybody to think this way, and everybody just needs to obey the golden rule. Once everybody obeys the golden rule, well, then we can have the utopian society. But that's not a plan. That's not action.
You're right. There will never be 100% of people that obey the golden rule. But so the idea of libertarianism is that you create a system that respect in it the golden rule, but that by respecting the golden rule can protect majority of people against the minority that will not respect it.
Well, what happens though when this happens?
But I mean,
it's not just the internal threat of internal, classes overthrowing your government. What about the threat of the external?
Yeah, Billy Bob, can I maybe rephrase Manuel? Let me rephrase the question. Yeah. So let's say, because you did frame that your answer. I mean, I would say it's a good answer, but you framed it in the context of the U.S. saying Canada. So the USA is rich enough. So even if we adopted a total libertarian system, far more libertarian than it is now, we do have more money, more capital than anyone else. So it's unlikely, say, Russians or Chinese capitalists could muscle in, because of course American capitalists would push them out, like you said. But what if you're Cuba? What if you're Mexico? What if you're not? What if you're the small fish in the pond? How does a libertarian system have controls against, like Billy Bob said, external intrusion?
You mean the way I see things, when capital, if you're a poor country, normally when capital comes, it will develop things. It will, we all agree that the Industrial Revolution raise the living standard of most people, because once you domesticate the force of nature, the productivity goes up, and I think it's what all people want from an economic system. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, sure. Capitalism was a huge improvement over existing feudalism.
Over feudalism.
Yeah, yes. Our argument is that socialism is a further advancement.
It's utterly short-sighted because it's going to end the world.
Well, that's
granted,
point.
While we're here, I'm glad I'm benefiting from it, but I wouldn't want to be 2 or 3 generations down the road, because it is the scientific method that's destroying the world. I mean, any technology you want to bring up, and I'll articulate that for you. Anyone. So So yeah, that's fine. I wanted to make one point, and I think I forgot it. Yes, I forgot it because
It's
because
okay,
that.
Bob.
Oh
It'll
no,
come
that
to you.
came up. I forgot that. Oh yes, that's the point. It's not the minority that won't follow the golden rule. It's the majority. I won't follow the golden rule. I'll tell you that right now. And I don't. I can go out there because of human nature and find I can't. I'll be like Diogenes with his lamp. I'm looking for an honest man. Where's an honest man? I won't find one. You got to be kidding me. That's why I brought up the Christianity question. I mean, it's so embedded in the black community around here. The Baptist expression of their religion, and it's you can't argue it. But I'm saying nobody follows the golden rule. That's nobody. None of you do. I guarantee
Hey.
you don't.
I try.
I mean, so think of it in
I
terms
don't
of
try.
capitalist terms.
I don't even try. I got forces against me. People go, well, if you don't like this country, why don't you leave? And I go, fucking no. I've been fighting these fucking bastards all my life. Why don't they leave and improve my life? Why should I leave and improve theirs? You can't survive in America unless you're a cocksucker. And I don't mean that as a homosexual slant, but I mean that you got to be a bastard to live here. You can't be a golden rule bullshitter. You got to. This is dog eat dog. It's like this guy that wrote this little essay.
The golden rule doesn't prevent you from responding. If somebody violates the golden rules, you are allowed to use force to protect as much as you want. I want just to
that's why we have force everywhere. That's why we have all these shootings and everything every day. Every fucking goddamn day, there's a mass shooting in this country.
Okay, Ian wanted to directly present an argument. It sounded like.
Well, I mean, maybe I need to rephrase it. So let's say you're the president of Armenia or Cuba. I mean, really, bottom line, what is preventing me, the foreign capitalist, from just bribing every politician you have, buying up everything I can, and just owning the country just by me having more money? What is, without violating that non-aggression policy, how do you keep outsiders from taking over the country?
But already, if you bribe a politician against the will of the people, I think that would be a violation.
But the politician is an individual. Isn't that a violation of his rights?
But the existence of politicians is already problematic by itself.
Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't now argue that you're for abolishing the state. If you're for a minicarist, you're in favor of politicians existing.
Okay, they exist, but they have a specific role. The specific role is to protect the individual in the country, protect legitimate private property of people, and nothing more. I don't see once somebody tried to bribe them, they don't do the role that they should do. Now, how that's a big discussion. Could happen. I agree. I'm all for finding a solution to prevent that. But I think the less power they have, the less incentive there is to bribe them. Now, the world we are at right now, and I know that if I would press a button to put my system of ideal libertarian today, I know there would be a lot of problem because there are some people that have accumulated so much wealth and so much power that in such a system of libertarianism they would have a lot of illegitimate power. And I think that before having that, we have to address that. That's why, contrary to most libertarian, I believe in some reparation or some redistribution. As I said, Billy Bob, I told you the wealth of the billionaire, I think, is not legitimate. And if there is any revolution, I think, toward, let's say, a libertarian ideal, I think that wealth should be redistributed because it was stolen. in a way. And so that for me,
so you're like Jello. You're like Jello. We're trying to nail it to the wall, and you keep moving around. But that's how these discussions go. That's okay. That's how these discussions go. One of the primary issues I take with libertarianism as an ideology is that it treats this idea that property rights are sacrosanct and more important than any other possible consideration of justice or morality. So they take these property rights and they put them up here and they say, absolutely, we cannot violate this holy axiom. And that's silly because I can give you scenarios where doing that would be suicidal, doing that would be detrimental to humanity, doing that would be detrimental to society. So and I would argue that was the case that the Soviet Union faced in the 1930s, where you had these individual property owners who refused to allow a very, very necessary modernization of the agricultural system in order to end, perpetual cycles of famine, and they refused to do it. And so it forced the state to violate property rights, and it was the right thing to do. And so libertarians that claim that, property rights are inviolable and sacrosanct, it's a dogma. It's a religious dogma, and that's it. Because in reality, there's oftentimes, a number of cases can come up where you have to do that. And that's the right thing to do, is to violate these kinds of rights. And you just admitted that if you're a billionaire, we can violate those rights and you have a justification for that. But I'm saying justifications exist across the board. We can always come up with justifications. So this whole premise, this whole foundation that property rights are something we should just solely focus on is misplaced, because there's always going to be innumerable justifications. And so we need to look elsewhere as a bedrock, bottom line for the foundation of an ideology. And that's where I think the reality of class struggle comes in. That's my foundation, right? Because the reality of capitalism dividing society between two classes of people that have competing interests. So that's the fundamental bedrock. And when you understand that it's the capitalists that are happy with the status quo and will kill and die in order to perpetuate it, and refuse to allow the majority to seek progress and to attain greater possibilities for what societies are capable of, that's the problem. So then we get into this class struggle paradigm. And that, I think, is the appropriate way to perceive reality, to conceptualize reality, and to figure out a strategy for moving forward, and to figure out solutions for our problems. And to do it based on this idea that property rights are sacrosanct, again, is a waste of time, but it's only not a waste of time because so many people believe that. So that's why it's not a waste of time to discuss. But Manuel, before people start feeling sorry for you, you asked for this. You asked to come on our panel and to talk about imperialism. So don't feel sorry for Manuel, anybody. He asked. But it is 3 against 1. It is 3 against 1, and we're sorry for that.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion. Look, I could be talking with only libertarian, and we would say be an echo chamber of all agreeing with us. But I always appreciate to chat with people that look. I was a Marxist. I was a Trotskyite 15 years ago, and I decided to listen to libertarians. And I'm a person who can change its mind. And even today, among many libertarians, I have disagreement with them.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I believe in the when I say legitimate private property, I don't see any contradiction when I say that the billionaire should be expropriated because their property is not legitimate. If I go to your home and I steal your stuff, Billy Bob, the stuff that I stole you is not mine. You have the right to find a way to get it back and to get reparation for the trauma, the lost time, and there must be a consequence.
To vulgarize the point, I mean, let's just imagine a scenario where on your property is the only place in the universe this one plant grows, and from this plant you can create this vaccine that cures the pandemic that's going to kill everybody.
Mhm.
Right. So which way do we go? Do we protect your rights? And if you say no, you can't have access to my plant, we have to respect that. So these are the moral questions.
I think it's an extreme example, but
No, of course, but it illustrates that it's stupid to put to say that property rights are everything, and that we have to sacrifice the greater good or what society is capable of by enforcing these property rights. It's a nonsensical approach. Like, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to, reality is complicated. We can't have this one size fits all approach to governance in every society that is the same thing as property rights.
In that case, maybe in that case, I think that there are survival case where there's a way to like, if you said on my land there's a plan that can save all mankind, I would fully understand that. If it was the case, I would be happy to give it, or at least sell it. If I at least sell it, okay, give me a little compensation. Of course, yes. Especially if if the plant was there by luck, or if it was because I took care of it. If I took care of the so-called, I don't see how it could be realistic, but let's say if I took care of the only plants that could save mankind, I think I would deserve a little reward for it. But of course, that would be illogical to say that I have the right to keep it for myself and not save mankind.
Property rights, like, they're not a thing. It's, I mean, we're a society. We're a community, and so I just reject that foundational premise of property rights. It's just a silly way to perceive reality and to pursue solutions.
I think it's a very good principle. I think there may be a few exceptions, and I think we're gonna there may be some gray zone. Like I remember Stéphane Molyneux or somebody was trying to analyze those questions. I think if you're on a balcony and of a building and you fell, and the only way to save your life is to I don't remember, was to enter another apartment. In those cases, most of the time the people. The people would agree.
No, and of course, and I mean, no communist system is going to say that you have no right to your property. Like, I mean, it's a cost benefit analysis. It's a policy based on the existing material conditions. But it's just silly to say that property rights are inviolable, sacrosanct. That we can't.
Look. I'm open to find some gray zone and talk about them.
Guys, what do you guys have to say? Because I think I've given my best counter arguments, and they're not persuasive enough.
I think your one plant scenario would make a great screenplay, Hollywood material. I want to say that this reminds me of the 1960s. When the LaRouchites were all over campuses, and the discussion is very similar. But I have to give Emmanuel a lot of credit, because his conversation is different. At the time, I came up with a little phraseology that I used to call them pisswams, pisswams, poorly socialized white males. And that were manning these stations, and the way they would get people to come look at their literature is it was presented as anti-war literature, anti-Vietnam War literature. And then once they had you, this is how the golden rule applies to our friends in the libertarian movement. Then they would start feeding you all this crap. Some of it was like thinly veiled crap, like the Queen of England is a drug dealer, Well, she is. Okay, I'll grant you that. That's a kind of simplistic way of looking at it, but I'll grant you that. But a lot of the other a lot of the other rap was like not what was absolutely not true. It was a hustle. And once you got hustled into the movement, you became a kind of you were in a cult. It was a cultish atmosphere. And occasionally I would try to kibitz with them, but I found them so disingenuous and such liars that I found it just
You should
useless
go with
to
the Church of
bother.
Scientology. They're a lot more socialable.
But they weren't on
Scientologists.
campus. They weren't on campus. If they'd been on campus, I'd have turned their table over. But
Tom Cruise wasn't hanging out.
no, no Tom Cruise. No, just poorly socialized.
Ian, any
White
final
male.
thoughts?
Who
Or
I saw them push a woman to the ground because they were so misogynist, just misogynist to the core. This young woman was trying to explain her position to them, and she was winning the argument. And one of the guys just went around the table and pushed her to the ground. That was his debate. Fuck him.
The nap has
Back
its place.
then, I
The
mean,
nap has its
those
place,
like,
but it's
fuck
not
them.
the universal thing. So I would agree that in that situation, the nap was
No, they
fully
were all like that. I was on that campus for 7 years because I had to work a full-time job and a part-time job. Took me 7 years to get halfway through a master's. They were there the whole fucking time.
Wow.
They were just a constant irritant.
Does Spaz have any thoughts, Ian?
He's wants attention. He's he's a very patient guy, though. This is Spaz. He's a beagle. Jack Russell mix.
That we are approaching almost 2 hours. I think we should conclude. I wanted to show a book that is against imperialism from a libertarian standpoint. Ralph Raico is my favorite libertarian historian. To be against imperialism, as an open mind person, I still like the people like Jacques Powell, but yeah.
Have you read this one yet? The Stalin biography by Lacerda?
I bought the book because Jacques was telling me that I should read it.
I need to read it too.
It's on my list.
I opened it up and the type is so small and single space. I was like, but yeah. I've got to get to it.
In fact, I offered that book to Jacques. I sent it to him freely. He said he read it, that it was entertaining, but that he said it was anti-historical because Jacques disagreed with the libertarian approach of things. And I respect that. For me, continuing to have the discussion with people like Jacques and you, Billy Bob, is enriching for me.
I enjoyed the discussion. I appreciate everybody joining us. Carlo, thank you so much. Ian, thank you. And then Manuel, it was your idea.
I wish you will, guys. I wish you will.
I give you credit for getting this all together. So we will be broadcasting soon with another discussion of some sort. Maybe a debate, maybe an agreement fest. What's my other YouTube channel is the Blowback Exposing Imperial Decline. So that's our bi-weekly podcast on current events. I recommend everyone to check that out. And this is broadcasting on my personal YouTube account. So thank you for watching, and we will see you soon. Bye, guys.